Welcome to the Net Zero Carbon Summit. Today we are joined by Rundle, Vice President of ACT Research. Welcome to the summit, Anne.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks FreightWaves for having me and hearing what ACT Research has been up to most recently in terms of commercial vehicle decarbonization.
I gotta admit, it's some of my favorite stuff. I mean, who doesn't love a good decarbonization chat, which is why we're here today. Before we get too far into that, let's get some background on you and kind of how you started at ACT Research.
Sure. So, my background, I'm an engineer, University of Michigan, always been in transportation markets and had started to go kind of to the dark side away from propulsion. I'm really sort of an engine girl. 20 years at Eaton Corporation in engine and transmission stuff. And then started to say, what about alternative and what about battery electric, and took a leap and got into a small startup. So always sort of had that as, I think we're going to get to there eventually in transportation. And spent 3 years at Fiat Chrysler as heading up our strategy for electrification, anything from a Fiat 500 all the way to a Class 6 or 7 commercial vehicle. And I started to see, wait a minute, there's a value proposition on commercial vehicles that are looking at, payback and operating savings and so on, and aren't necessarily looking at upfront price parity. And I said, I want to get out of the passenger vehicle focus and I want to get into commercial vehicle. And so that's what brought me to ACT Research. And ACT Research is, the gold standard there. If you want to know about forecast and what's happening, you go to ACT Research. So it's kind of going to the best of the best.
I was going to say, I know that we have some writers here at FreightWaves that are big fans of ACT Research and always like to publish what you guys have. So you guys kind of are the gold standard, and I appreciate it for having, as a data research nerd myself, I appreciate the commitment to accurate data and quality research. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, if we can't be pretty good about it, we don't touch it, then, we're smart enough not to take swags about stuff.
So you stick with what you know, what you can guarantee. Don't mess with some of that unknown. One of the things that you guys just released was that decarbonization study. What are some of those cool findings that you guys found for some of those alternative fuels? Because, that's something that, not a lot of people are really talking about yet, but it's something that's going to come up here in it's going to be a much bigger focus here in the next couple of years. So what were some of the cool findings that you guys had?
Well, I think just in overall, this is what we're referred to as our third edition. So in fact, way back in 2018, there was a look-see at it, but we did our first edition starting in we posted in first quarter of 2021, and I had just started in with ACT Research at the time. This is now our third edition. We published it at the end of June. And so, in some cases, the findings were, not revolutionary or hugely different from what we knew from, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, but are sort of building on that and saying, yep, we sort of thought this was going to happen and we see it happening. But I think just from an overall perspective, we expect by 2030 in North America, going from class 4 through 8, we'll see about 25% of the market be, primarily battery electric. And then, we would see that tipping point to just popping above 50% by 2040. So sort of a significant change of where we are today, which is hardly anything at all. I think we just bump into maybe about 1%. But part of that is just vehicle availability, things like that. But also just there's been tremendous improvements and changes in battery technology. And that will continue to happen, significant, especially if I compare to when I first was in with the startup in 2007. Just energy density and cycles and everything. You wouldn't dream of trying to electrify a Class 8 tractor. 10 years ago, people would have thought you were absolutely insane. And I'm sure there are some people today who still think it's insane, but it's technically feasible. So that's the difference. And I think that you just look at from a total cost of ownership and operating expenses, there are a number of applications today in class 4 through 8. Now, I'm not talking a long haul class 8 tractor, but I'm talking, medium duty trucks that have a duty cycle that really says, wow, you're better off as a battery electric than you are as a diesel. I'm not idling. I'm not idling a diesel, and I'm not getting really not that great. I mean, a diesel is fabulous for on-highway driving. It is not meant to be a city stop-start. It's just not meant to be that way. But a battery electric is. I mean, a battery electric is like bringing it on all day long. You don't pull that much energy from the batteries when you're going at a lower speed. You're not driving long distances in a given day. You have a lot of stop and start. You've got a lot of time to recharge, so you can have a very relatively inexpensive battery, EV charger or EVSE as electric vehicles, something equipment. But so it actually says, wow, all day long you should do this, or even taking something like a yard spotter or a terminal tractor. They're not high speed, and they don't go very far. And so there is, chances for opportunity charging and stuff. So, is every application today perfect for battery electric? Not at all. But are there some that, fit very well? The answer is absolutely yes. So there is that. But I think also just for us, this whole infrastructure rollout, and I'm not talking here about public, charging infrastructure, which a lot of people focus on. So many private fleets, it's behind the fence. It is just getting that time from permitting and getting, adequate supply into a distribution center in an area. It's not so easy. It's taking 2 to 3 years in some applications. So it's when you want to have something, hardwired and everything. I'm not talking about mobile type of chargers. So that unfortunately, I think the infrastructure part is not catching up as quick as industry folks would like.
That's one of the things that I have always been so hesitant about, even on like a personal consumer level. I love the idea of electric cars. I love what they can do. But at the same time, if I'm on a road trip, there's not necessarily a lot of great charging. I mean, I'm in the Midwest, so I have to drive many hours. And so it's one of those where I'm like, well, if I'm 600 miles in, I'm going to need to get a charger, and I can't guarantee there's going to be one there because the infrastructure is just not there. So that's one of the things that, is a little frustrating, especially looking at it from like the whole supply chain view. One of the things that you brought up that I really like was that those medium duty applications and some of those smaller applications is, it's perfect for maybe some local deliveries or something that, goes home every night. Maybe your dedicated haul fleets where they're not really going more than 200 miles away from one facility. I think that those are some of the best like baby steps in, because I think when everyone just thinks of electric trucks, they think of those long haul trucks, which are going from coast to coast or, thousands of miles. But in reality, there's a such easier application, such as, those dedicated fleets that just have a couple trucks that just run 200 miles or so every day. And I really feel like that's kind of like the gateway and the easiest place to start to get, some of these fleets electric.
Yeah, and decarbonization, especially because I think you think also, we did comparison and looking at and now talking and, moving freight, so Class 8 tractors. And you look at the difference between a for-hire, where they are doing longer hauls and they're not necessarily have a lot of parking where they're at. They also don't have, wet hose. They don't have fueling behind the fence anyway. So that's a challenge for them. But when you look at a lot of the private fleets, that's different. Their goal is to get their drivers home frequently, almost every night, the way they've got things set up with distribution centers. So there's every application is not, every Class 8 tractor doesn't operate the same way anyway. It's not used the same way. And I think also what we're finding in some of the early adopters, especially I'm thinking Class 8 tractors, is how do I plan my routes such that I can use this, I can use a shorter range. So it's a different way of thinking. It definitely is. And I have a small Fiat 500 E, right? And I live in a high-rise, vintage high-rise in Chicago. It was built in 1929. I do not have a garage. I have off-street parking, but I don't have a way I can plug in. And I have to think about it. But I liken it to be no different that when I lived in Detroit and in 1987, I bought a Mercedes 300 turbo diesel because I was doing a lot of back and forth across the state of Michigan. And I said, I want a diesel because I'm the duty cycle I was using for is perfect for a diesel. And I just knew that I had to plan when I could buy fuel because I lived in Birmingham, Michigan. There was one fuel station and then it closed. So I always, when I was on Interstate 94, I knew exactly where the truck stops were and I stopped. So I didn't have range anxiety that I was going to run out of fuel. I wasn't stupid. I knew where to stop.
You kind of, did that base level planning, because once you kind of get past that first hump of it, you're set. It's just getting that first little collection of information going, okay, well, this is where I have to fuel. So I need to plan around that. And so now, instead of having the gaslight where you're like, oh, I have 10 miles to go, you're just like, no, this is always my new baseline and I just know what I have to do.
Yeah, it takes a different mindset, but then in some ways it can help fleets because now they're really sort of forced a little bit more to do route optimization. So there you go.
Which is also a huge perk as well, because then you're not having trucks running as empty and they're not just running for the sake of running. Like it gets you more and you end up being more profitable with route optimization. In this study that you guys found, was there anything that you kind of were surprised by that you're like, oh, wait, this is kind of a cool finding? Did you guys have any of those moments?
In one aspect, kind of sort of yes, no. I don't know if it was cool, but it's sort of an aha. And it was brought out to us by someone was talking about in this, now we're, going back to Class 8 tractors was, hey, how can you say that, how can you guys have this kind of adoption rate if in fact, the TCO is barely there, and in fact it's not. And we're like, oh yeah, so much of our adoption rate for Class 8 tractors up until 2029, 2030 is really being pushed by CARB's Advanced Clean Truck, and looking at those states and as they cascade in and adopt. So Advanced Clean Truck becomes effective, let's call this, we're in September. You've got 3 months and Advanced Clean Truck is effective in the state of California. And then other states are cascading and adopting that. And so because of that, we have put into our forecast in the assumption that those regs will be met. And when I look at, and in our study, we actually called attention to that and said, wow, by 2030, more than 50% are going to be financially demand driven. But prior to that, the push in Class 8 tractors is really coming from meeting that regulatory ZEV mandate. So that's huge. So that does sort of put, the onus, on the upfront years, but then it flips. And by the time you get to 2040, it becomes a carrot versus a stick, right? And that is all because of improvements in battery energy and battery technology, and just some more costly expense then that starts to happen with diesels as the 2027 NOx regs come into effect. So you've got costs coming down on the BEV side and on the fuel cell side, but costs going up on the diesel side.
That is kind of interesting from like a high level view where, you see the regulation that's driving everything. That's definitely something I didn't think about. That's kind of cool from like a data perspective.
It is. And I think that's where you look and you say, and that's a lot of regulations and things are there to sort of force and push that and push the adoption of technology. I do see, the concern though that individuals who are operating Class 8 tractors, have as a concern is, when will I get the payback and when will I get the cost savings? And I think that's why more so than other class of trucks, those entities are really, I'm trying to think of the right word, but incentives and voucher plans and subsidies play a bigger role. And when we looked at some of the early adopters and fleets, I could not find evidence of any fleet yet who are purchasing Class 8 tractors that are ZEVs that haven't done that with the support of subsidies. And we're talking more than just the 40 grand that will happen with IRA.
That is actually really cool. So we are running out of time today, but if someone wants to reach out to you about the study or their findings, where can they find you outside of the summit?
How do they find me outside of the summit? I am on LinkedIn. I think you'd mentioned that. And you can find me also through ACT Research's website. It's actresearch.net. And it's like, here's who we have. Obviously, this is such a cool thing. It's such a cool industry right now to be in. I'm like super geeked. I'm old. I've been around for a while, and it's really neat to see this change. So I love to talk about it, and I love to learn from it, because everybody you talk to, they learn something from me, but I'll learn something from them.
Oh, absolutely. That's what makes transportation and supply chain everything that it is everyone has different experiences and stories. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anne.
Thank you.